Okay, I'm Andrew Sears. I'm the president of City Vision University. I grew up kind of in the hood in Kansas City. I got started in rescue mission work in 1992 as summer staff at City Union Mission in Kansas City. That was back whenever Dan Doty was the young new executive director there, and now he's retired. So that tells you that I've been in rescue ministry for quite a while. I they were wondering why this engineer, I was studying engineering at the time, was going and working at a rescue mission. And I didn't really know, but God had a plan. And so I ended up going to MIT next. I did a .com. My advisor, I co-founded a research group with one of the fathers of the internet and kind of had a life burnout and realized my heart was, I turned back to God and realized my heart was for the poor. So I started up an organization that initially was called Tech Mission, and we took over the operations of Rescue College that grew out of the Association of Gospel Rescue Mission. And so uh, we grew the school from about 30 students to about 500 students. And I did my doctoral work on disruptive innovation in Christian higher education in the poor. And essentially, what that means is if we were to create a new wineskin for Christian higher education and to center it around equipping people to serve the poor, how would we do that? And that's what we've done with City Vision University. But I was asked to speak on how rescue missions can utilize AI effectively. Now, for some people, they even think about that question. They're like, what? That doesn't even make sense. Let me jump into that question because I think it's pretty interesting. One of the first starting points is our theology solid? Now, a lot of people who are super risk takers in terms of doing urban ministry, they love to take risk to love the poor in the name of Jesus. They go and part of your job is to help equip people in your city to say, you know what, more people need to be doing this. You can't just be afraid of the stereotype risk that if you go serve at the mission, you're going to get shot or something bad's going to happen. And people get exposed to the city, they get exposed to working with the poor, and they realize that, as long as you know what you're doing and you're working with people who know what they're doing, then it's going to work out. So, and it's kind of the same thing with technology and AI. So, are we willing to use technology and AI to love the poor in the name of Jesus? So that's essentially what we're trying to do. So, and you can't be afraid of the stereotype risk of AI. I mean, there's all this stuff of like, okay, AI hallucinates, AI does this bad thing. Well, it's kind of the same thing about what people think about the cities. You can't be too afraid of that risk to do that. So that's really, gets into our theology. Are you too much of a techno pessimist or a techno optimist, or do you have kind of a balanced understanding? And that gets into a field that's called a theology of technology. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but what that is an emerging field that adopts other disciplines and adopts general theology and applies that to fields like media ecology, theology of work, the field of studying science and religion, technology and media addiction, technology and ministry. And ultimately, we have to have a good theology of technology. We used to have a course in that, but not enough people took it because there weren't enough techies that were doing this, but it's still a passion. And ultimately, what we have to avoid is this, dualism heresy. And no one in rescue ministry would say that they're following the dualism heresy, but often we can functionally do that. We say that, okay, technology's in the secular domain and we should stay away from it. If you are familiar with the field of theology of work, Paul Stevens is one of the leaders in that, and he said this secular sacred dualism heresy is the worst heresy of the Christian church. So I realize I'm preaching to the choir with you guys because you guys work and you are bridging these two things, the secular and sacred, in your work every day. All I'm saying is we have to do that with technology also. We can't functionally treat technology as inherently bad. We have to, recognize its potential for redemptive purposes, or else we're following a heresy. So, on that positive note, let me jump into this. So, as a techie, as a Christian techie, we all often are trying to figure out, okay, what would Jesus look like in this cultural context? So, Jesus, he was the first techie. If you look at the word tecton, so in the Bible, it says that Jesus was a tecton, and that means craftsman. So we don't really know if he was a carpenter. People just assume that he was a carpenter. But ultimately, the word that described Jesus was a tekton. That's really the root word of technology. And I like to think of Jesus as the first techie. And paraphrase, in the Bible, become a Jew to the Jew and a Greek to the Greeks. I like to think that part of me as a Christian techie is we're trying to do this is become a Jew to the Jew and a geek to the geeks. Um, so ultimately, there's kind of a question is what does that look like to do that with AI? And there's a lot of different analogies you can use as you're thinking about principles for AI. And I'm going to use three analogies for that. So my one preferred, like a lot of people just think AI is this weird thing that, the HAL robot's going to take over the world and things like that. That's not what we're talking about. For the most part, to not be afraid of it, just think of it as a smarter web browser. You guys have typed into Google and then it shows you this AI overview. And ultimately, what AI really is it's having a smarter web browser. Now, there's other applications. And another example is it's like a calculator. So if you're teaching people math and they're learning their times tables, you don't want them using a calculator. But once you get into advanced math, then you don't really care whether people use a calculator because everyone who does, work in the real world is going to use a calculator or spreadsheets or things along those lines. Now, here's the third analogy is an e-bike. And with our students, I often find you have the e-bike problem. So I live on a hill that is extremely steep, and I try to pedal my bike up that hill, and I can barely do it. Now, if you have an e-bike, you can pedal, or you can press a button where the bike does all the work for you. If you put 100 people on an e-bike on my hill, how many of them do you think would pedal? Probably zero, because they're just going to say, this hill's too hard, and I'm going to have the e-bike do the work for me. So that's what happens whenever you give students AI and they're more junior students and they don't know how to use it. So there's four principles that I've learned in working with students and working with other people. AI is more likely to be abused by those with less education and tech savvy. So our intro students, we had a student who, and we have AI detection whenever people submit assignments, and this, we flag those assignments. We have an AI, use policy with our students. But we had a student that submitted, and she actually had a bachelor's degree from a reputable Bible school, but she was submitting papers, and it was all AI written. And she, I talked with her on actually it was a Zoom meeting, and she lied to me to her face and said it wasn't written by AI. And then I said, well, what about this part here where the AI invented a new book of the Bible and it invented verses and it was quoting from the verses that was a new book in the Bible? Well, that's the type of problem that I'm talking about of people, abusing this. So AI, I think, is most helpful for those that are in senior leadership, and it can make your work more effective, just like a web browser would. It can be a game changer in terms of research and learning, and I'm going to use some examples of that. And I think that the way to think about it, it's an important skill for rescue mission leadership to develop your ability to engage with AI, similar to using web browsers. So a lot of the answers that I'm able to come up with that my junior staff can't do, it's because I know how to do better Google searches than them. It's the same thing, in terms of writing prompts for AI. There's this term they use, prompt engineering. I think that's overstating it, but the prompts for AI are a lot more complicated to design, and you can do a lot more with them than, say, a web browser. Now, one of the other principles of AI is to understand where we are in terms of technology development. So you have bleeding edge technologies, and then so like in digital cameras or like smartphones, I was uber nerd and I got the first models that came out, and they were horrible. But then what happens is iPhone comes out and they design the phone for the rest of us. Apple designs the phones for the rest of us. So the question is, where are we in terms of technology adoption? Most AI products are kind of here. They're starting to develop some products that are here, and I'm going to try to focus more on these products, not the gee whiz products like, are you going to have a self-driving car? Me and my kids were in San Francisco last week, and they had all the AI, self-driving cars in San Francisco. It was amazing that, it took us from one place to another. There's no driver. They wouldn't even let you sit in the driver's seat, even though there was one. But then whenever there's gridlock traffic, I noticed that about every fifth car was one of these AI bots, and AI bots didn't know how to handle gridlock traffic because they wouldn't, break the rules, and then they made the gridlock even worse. So anyway, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, impactful transformative uses. So let me talk about ways to use AI. Just the main way to use AI is through chat interfaces. So in Microsoft, they have their copilot.microsoft.com. It used to be called Bing Chat. In Google, it's gemini.google.com, or you can go to chatgpt.com. So that's the basic interface. Now, for both Google and Bing, they will add in some AI responses, but if you want to really engage with this, what you need to do is pull up those three websites. So if someone asked at the beginning, how do you learn this? It's like riding a bike. The first thing you need to do is ride a bike. And then you can kind of get better at it over time. But you can look up things, but it's really you learn by doing on these things is the best way to do it. Now you can expand your knowledge by looking up things. Now there's more advanced tools, and I do a lot of stuff with something that Google has called Notebook LM. And it's particularly helpful to upload a collection of documents and books, say for grants. I'm going to show you how I'm using it around rescue mission history. It's also useful for image generation. So if you're doing a PowerPoint and you want an image, you don't want to have to pay for it. You just have it, generate the image that you're looking for. And it's been amazing the type of images that they can do. If you want to get more advanced, there's things that's called Gemini Gems. And that's where, say you wanted your development department wanted to create a library of all your grants that could speed up your grant development. Then you could use something called Google's Gemini Gems. And then there's going to be specialty services. Now, this is just kind of an outline of my talk, so don't get overwhelmed by this. I'm going to provide some examples of these. So this is kind of the list of the type of AI that you might want to use. Now, let me talk about the most likely applications of AI in missions. And so the main way you're going to use it is going to be another tool you use in daily tasks similar to Google Search, but with more advanced capabilities. Then I think the area where it's going to get used the most is going to be in development. It's going to speed grant writing. There's likely going to be specialist vendors that are going to come out. I'm skeptical of those vendors in the short term. The reason is because the hard part of this is not people who specialize in fundraising or grant writing. The hard part is the technology. And Google and Microsoft and maybe OpenAI are going to dominate this space. And a lot of the other people aren't going to be able to do this. So I wouldn't say rush out and get your development people, doing this a ton, but they should be learning about it. The area that I think is more applicable, any sort of learning and research. So like program research, compliance, policy, procedure research. It's a complete game changer, for this. Over the next decade or two, it's going to really revolutionize a lot of that. Over time, I imagine, many of you have to engage with 211. But there's going to be AI tools that are equivalent of 2011. So, someone who's in trouble and they need help. Imagine, 211's kind of clunky. Imagine something that could provide, okay, you have these 10 problems. These are the 15 best possible solutions in your city to those 10 problems for that person, trying to solve that type of approach. And then the other areas and the things I put in bold is where I'm going to focus on is some of the examples. Learning from other missions. So City Vision, I'm using kind of my MIT background to start to develop things that we're calling toolkits, but they're really just libraries of resources that in the long run, the main use for them is going to be with AI, and I'll show you an example of that. But the other, I think, big opportunity is going to be employee and client training. It's going to allow you to customize your content for your audience, and I'll use an example of that and connect your missions history with a larger history. So Let me talk about what we're trying to do with City Vision. So we have a 5-year plan we just started, and we have a 5-year. So some of you went to Andrew Eason's talk on our Wounded Healers program. So we have about 100 some partners, and our goal is that for their program graduates, that 10% of their program graduates are going to participate in our Wounded Healers program. We're not going to be a solution for everyone, but for those, and they're going to have dramatically improved outcomes for those that participate in that. And then for staff, most of our students, most of our 500 students are staff in your organization. So what we want to do with most of our partners is we want to enable them to more than double their total staff training hours. Many missions are being run like they're industrial organizations where you stay in the same job for 40 years and you get trained 40 years ago and you get your degree and you're done. But we live in a world of lifelong learning, and corporations, I would say on average, most corporations are spending 5 to 10 times on staff training of what most rescue missions are doing. So we can help you train your people more effectively. But the part that I'm going to talk about with AI really is how do we move the movement forward? Can we be create toolkits and advance the whole movement? That's really what we're trying to do. Now, with that, what we're doing is we're creating these kind of innovation hubs and these toolkits. So we have one around HR and staff. We have development. We have some around social enterprise, program and counseling. And with that, the way we work with partners, we have about 600 partner meetings a year. We have last year we had about 350 students from partners. We have advisory councils, and with that, we're developing all these different toolkits that are out there. And I'll show you some of these toolkits in a minute, but they're libraries of resources. Resources on addiction counseling, everything you might want, different survey or different assessment forms you might give clients, or different program templates that you use with people, HR toolkits, nonprofit food services, development. I'm going to show you the rescue mission values and theology toolkit that we're starting to build out with a history, a staff training toolkit, and we hope to develop an aftercare toolkit. And the idea is, we're engaging with kind of all the content in the world related to the work you're doing, and we're trying to pull a lot of that into these toolkits. And then we're working with our faculty to do that. And with that, what we're trying to do is we're trying to, serve our students, we're trying to serve your organizations, and we're trying to serve, the movement. And we're doing what, is called diffusion of innovation in that. So if you've been to Dick, did you already give your talk, or are you going to give your talk later today?
This afternoon.
Okay, so Dick's going to give a talk about, how do we adapt without, adapt to changes in the world without losing our soul. And, in innovation, what happens is you have an organization that starts to grow, but then the world changes, and then it starts to decline. So how do you recontextualize? And that's really difficult, and that's what his talk's going to be about. But you have to do two things. You have to have equal competency in the tradition, understanding the how and why of the rescue mission movement, but then you have to have strong competency and innovation and emerging trends and models. Now, I'm going to show you what that looks like in practice. And this will probably be the most interesting part of my talk. So if you're sleeping before on all this nerdy stuff that I'm sharing, this part might be a little bit more interesting to you. But let me just pause for a second and see, do people have any questions or comments before I move on? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and jump in, and then I'll open it up more widely for questions later. So I mentioned these toolkits. So Dick McMillan, Dick has worked in the rescue mission movement for more than 50 years. We're working on a rescue mission history project and using AI for that. And what he's been starting to do, one of the tragedies of rescue missions in general, from a history perspective, is you guys are so busy doing the work and saving lives that no one's writing the history. There haven't been any good histories written about the rescue mission movement for decades. And most of the good histories are like 80 years old, and most of them are out of print. So what we've been starting to do is let's scan some of those out of print histories, let's combine them together, and put them into a public domain archive, assuming that works. and then share them with people. So what I've done is I've combined all that into a notebook LM history. So let me kind of explain to you the three parts of what this looks like. Now you could do this so that if you look at the web address is just notebooklm.com. Now there's a free version. I paid for the plus version that allows you to do a little bit more fancy things, but most of this is available. And what I did is I imported those books. So we have like 5 or 6, books there. But we've also been going through and I designed a Gemini project, a Google Gemini project. And let me see if I can pull that out. Um, just give me a second to try to find that. So my Google Gemini project is right here. And I gave it a list of all the rescue missions that we have in our database. It's about 460 rescue missions. And then I asked it to compile a list of their history web pages. And um, and I've been going through and importing these. I'm not through it because it came up with way too many. But what I've been doing is going through. So it took it about 5 minutes to come up with uh, the history web pages of about 460 rescue missions, and it also identified when those rescue missions were founded, and I've been combining those and then importing those into this where is it? Notebook LM. So if you go here on Notebook LM, you first have the sources, and you can add documents. So if you're going to do grant writing, you could add like 100 grants that you've done, and then you say, write a 5-page grant focused on this topic, and that's compliant with this sort of template, and it would write a grant for you. Now, you don't want to submit that grant, but it might make it twice as fast to submit that grant. Now, so what I've done is I've added in all these websites, I've added in YouTube histories, I've added in different Google Docs and things. So if you go down, I think I have about 150 sources that's a part of this. So I just asked it, I asked it a question for all the rescue missions on the list. When were they founded? And it took it about 3 minutes, and it gave me a list. I don't think this has ever been compiled. So in 3 minutes, I compiled something that was never done, probably in the history of the rescue mission movement, of a list of every rescue mission and when it was founded. So it was able to do that using various websites and using this book history. I've been wanting to, and I haven't had time to do this. I've been wanting to create kind of like a family tree of rescue missions out of this. But let me show you some of the more applicable things that I've done with this. So one thing that you can do with Notebook LM is you can have it generate a podcast. And let me just make sure that I'm sharing in a way that you guys can hear my audio. Let's see. Share sound, optimize. Okay. Let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen also. So share. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to play something, and if someone can tell me if they can hear this. So it takes it about 2 minutes to create a history. And I gave it some very specific instructions on how I wanted it to generate the history. And what I did is I wanted this to be essentially like a podcast that's designed for someone who's new at a rescue mission. Now, listen to the quality of the voices on this.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we're doing a deep dive into something really inspiring, the history.
Can you guys hear that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so this guy has a way better radio voice than I do, but listen to
of the rescue mission movement.
Yeah, we want to sort of peel back the layers and look at the origins of this incredible work.
Exactly. And maybe you're new to the rescue mission world, perhaps just started working or volunteering somewhere?
Right, so we thought this would be a great way to give you some context, understand the roots of the movement you're now part of. Hopefully it's inspiring too.
We've pulled together quite a bit of material histories of specific missions, broader analyses, you name it.
It's a rich history, definitely.
So our mission today, if you will, is to trace those origins, look at the key people, the core values, the impact.
And really connect it all back to the work that's happening right now, the work you might be involved in.
Okay, let's dive in. Where do we even start? What were those very first impulses, the seeds of it all.
Well, you really have to go back to the source, right? The teachings, the actions of Jesus Christ.
That foundational element.
Yeah, that idea you hear quoted sometimes, like from The Gathering Place. Whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. That really captures it.
That focus on caring for the marginalized, the vulnerable.
Precisely. And, even in the very early centuries of the Christian church, charity work was a big deal. Maybe not formal rescue missions as we know them now, but...
But the groundwork was there. That spirit of compassion.
Exactly. It laid a foundation for the more organized efforts that came much later.
So when did things start getting more, well, organized? When do we see the first actual missions?
It's interesting. People often point to the Jerry McAuley Water Street mission in New York City as like the big starting point, and it was hugely influential, no doubt.
But maybe not the absolute first.
Turns out, no. There were earlier examples. One really notable one is the Western Seamen's Friends Society.
Okay, tell me about that.
It was organized way back in 1830. Think about that, 1830.
Oh, that is early.
And what's really key is that it was specifically undenominational right from the start.
Meaning it wasn't tied to one specific church.
Exactly. It aimed for broader reach, broader cooperation. That became a pretty important thread in the movement later on.
Fascinating. So 1830. But Macaulay's mission, even if not the first, clearly made waves. Why was it so significant?
Well, Jerry McAuley himself, his story is just incredible. He came from a really rough background, crime, prison.
And then completely turned his life around.
A total transformation. And he used that experience to found not just the Water Street mission, but also the Cremorne mission. He had this deep desire to reach people others had written off.
Like who specifically?
He focused on what some called the unworthy poor. People struggling with alcoholism, for instance. Folks that maybe even the church sometimes kept at arm's length.
In his approach.
It was rooted in this message of simply love, unconditional love and acceptance. That was quite radical for the time, challenging those ideas about who was deserving of help.
You can see how that would resonate.
Oh, absolutely. And it created this amazing ripple effect. Take Samuel Hadley. He walks into Macaulay's mission, has this profound conversion experience, changes his whole life.
Wow.
And he doesn't keep it to himself. He encourages his brother, Colonel Henry H. Hadley.
Colonel Hadley.
Yeah. And he goes on to found something like 60 other rescue missions across the country.
60.
Okay, so I don't know about you, but the first time I heard a podcast that was auto-generated, so that was auto-generated, took it about 3 minutes. Part of what's interesting about that is that can be done for any mission. So let me just show you an example of the prompts that I used to generate that. And this is what I mean by like getting good at prompts. So I asked it to design this for staff orientation. So I said, focus on the history of the rescue mission movement to inspire new staff and supporters of a rescue mission. Include key historical figures and organizations, summarize the biblical basis of the work of rescue missions and what's unique about their approach and values and their overall impact. Explain their mission as a part of that movement. And, in this case, I was doing it for Citygate, but it could be for GRMF. Connect the movement of the works of Jesus in the early century of the Christian church and charity work. And it came up with that. Now, here's where this gets interesting. This is where this can be applicable for staff training. So I thought that Bram was going to be here, but I don't think he is. I could have done this for City Union Mission too. And City Union Mission would have been a good example since Dan Doty's there and there's really good history on it. But I asked it to prepare an orientation, prepare this as an orientation for new staff and volunteers at the Bay Area Rescue Mission. And essentially what it did is it did a podcast like that, but it was all, say, hey, welcome to the, Bay Area Rescue Mission. Here's how this mission connects to the larger movement. Here's the history of this mission. And here's how this connects to the larger movement and, the Jesus work and the work of the early church. And that can be inspiring for people, right? So it's not going to be the only resource. It's not going to replace you as an individual training people because we don't want the computer to replace us, but it can augment that. And if I were a new staff at a rescue mission and, Dan Doty presented the history and then they also said, by the way, there's also this podcast that summarizes the history, I would have been doubly impressed. I would have been impressed by hearing, Dan Doty share the history, but I'm like, hey, these guys are current with technology. They just did an AI overview of their history. So that's an example of how you can use this. Now, the other way that this can be used is, generating a better history for your organization and tying your own history. So for any one of you, and I can share this Notebook LM with you guys. If you have a Google account and you send me an email to andrew@cityvision.edu and send me your Gmail account, or if you're using Google for your email, services, I can give you access to this. And then you guys can try out some prompts. So you can go and you can say, write a history. Well, why don't I just go ahead and do it? So write a history of City Union Mission in Kansas. And then let me include some of these things. So I'll do this too. And you can see, what it comes up with. And part of what we can do is if we use innovation, we can use that to connect better with our history. So what's happened in the rescue mission movement is we're all too busy to write histories. Well, if we use AI and we check it, and I'll talk a little bit more about doing that so it doesn't make up dates and make up figures, then we can get better histories. And there's things I can do here. Like it's probably going to provide me a 1 to 2 page history. I could ask it to write a 10-page history. I could ask it to write a 30-page history. I could ask it to contextualize that history for new employees and to write it in an inspirational tone, so that you could hand this out as a document. So I'm asking it to do something pretty complicated, so it takes a little while. So anyway, I don't know. Can you guys probably can't see this very well, but it came up. Let me see how many page history this is. You guys can see, and you can save to a note. I think there's a button here that I can press to convert it to a Google Doc, or you can just copy it to a Google Doc. So it came up with maybe a 2 to 3 page history. You can fact check Reverend Mrs. David Buckley. Is that right, Dan?
Yep.
And 1924. Did I get the date? Get the date right? Let's see. Yeah, talks a lot about different aspects of the history, and you can decide how you want this emphasized in various capacities. So anyway, so that's one way this can be used. But the idea, I use that specific example because you can do that in any of those domains that I listed before. So I showed these kind of domains here. So I'm using that for employee and client training and customizing contents for your audience and connect with the larger history. But you could use something like that with development. You use that on, say you're trying to do a deep dive, like you want to provide a really good research report on the state of homelessness and the state of addiction in your city. Well, this is the perfect tool for that. You can, bring in 50 different articles, 50 different, studies and things along those lines, and then you can, ask various questions for that. So, all right. Now, we also use this in our courses. And I'm not going to go through all of this, so I'll just show you as an example. This is where I use this in a course. And what I did is I imported all the books that were going to be used in the course. I imported different, some of the key videos. And what I learned over time, what is AI good at? Like, there are things where it is incredibly worse than us, but there's things that it's better than us at. And you want to use it for that. So I used it to draw a connection. So like, motivational interviewing is huge in rescue missions. And there's, we have the students read about 1,500 pages on family therapy. And I wanted to know which model of family therapy is most similar to motivational interviewing, because I wanted to tie in motivational interviewing. I can't figure that out. Even someone who's an expert in this may not understand that. So, but the AI was able to give me an answer. So then we knew, whenever it covers this particular week, I think it was called solution focused therapy, solution focused family therapy. Whenever we covered the week on solution focused family therapy, we integrated motivational interviewing. Another one I did was, I know that people at missions deal with workaholism. And one of the theories they use is Bowen theory. So I wanted to explain, using the concepts of the course, how workaholism ties in. Because that can be, this is a family counseling, but a lot of times whenever people have an affair, they're having an affair not with another person, but with their work. And I wanted to basically help educate our students on that. So I worked with the AI to kind of write a 5-page paper that kind of is very specific on a very specific issue. None of the books, none of the resources would cover that. So that's an example of how I use this. Sometimes I would use it for, so these are examples, and I can kind of pull up the link. This is the article that I had it write, for students to basically be more aware the ways that they might, be getting addicted in that. So, and, becoming workaholics and ignoring their family. Other things. So this is, a lot of times there's Christian books, but I want to basically explain some of the problems of secular approaches. And sometimes the books cover what I want to get to, and sometimes they don't. So in this case, I wanted to basically explain the limits of scientism. So all of counseling kind of falls within the field of scientism, and scientism basically makes assumptions about the world so that you can get the whole field to work. But those assumptions aren't necessarily true. They just make the field work. So, scientism is the idea that only what you can perceive through the lens of science is real. And there's a whole lot of people who have critiqued that, and explaining that to our students. So these are all examples of what I would describe as generic content that I'm generating using AI that's going to improve a course. So that's an example, again, of what you might do with staff training.
Andrew, are you sharing your screen?
Oh, I'm not. Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks for letting me know that. Okay, sorry. Yeah, if that happens again, let me know, because I keep going back and forth. So this is the emotional fusion article that I was using. This is the philosophical assumptions of scientism and counseling. These are some of the prompts that I've been asking to get that. I'm not going to go into all of this. Is pretty good at designing case stories, like coming up with case studies. So I said, you're an expert at designing case studies to be used in Christian counseling master's courses. So you have to tell the AI who it is, because it's good at playing roles. So that's one of the key things of prompt engineering, is you say who it is. So design a case study story that can help students apply the narrative therapy model to a family. One of the family members has a very negative personal narrative because of their own history with addiction. Add details of the story to make it seem realistic and lifelike. You should focus primarily on providing the story to the case rather than making assignment elements to the case. So this last step was something that I added later, because whenever I asked it to do a case story, it turned the whole thing into an assignment. And I wanted to get the case story, and then I separately created an assignment. And, I rewrote, 20 to 40% of these things. And, I translated that, and then I used that as a case study. I could have gone out and bought a case study somewhere, but it's more effective to get a very specific case study. So that's another example. And then there's other things to try to translate theory into practice. So, I was trying to figure out what are the interventions related to addiction and family counseling. So I said, what are the most common interventions related to addiction and family counseling? It gave me some ideas. And then, I came up with a role play assignment related to an intervention, using that. Now, this is an example of where I've used AI for an image. So my pastor, he talked about how organizations secularize, and he used the M&M car. He's a big NASCAR fan. And he said, the M&M car, the primary brand on the M&M car is M&Ms, right? And the secondary, and this is the way it should be for Christians. We can have our primary brand needs to be Jesus. The secondary brand needs to be these other things. So M&M pays like, I don't know, a couple $1 million to get their brand, and then these other people pay like 50,000 to get their logos. This is the way our Christian identity should be. But I wanted to borrow his example, but I wanted to make it better using AI. So I, asked it to generate a NASCAR with Jesus on it. There are no NASCARs out there with Jesus on it, but I just wanted to make a point. So you can use this. So this was done in, Microsoft. It used to be called Bing Chat whenever I did it, but now they've renamed it to something else. So now a lot of the questions related to AI are how do you avoid problems? I've been trying to get some of my faculty to work with this, and initially it worked well, but in some cases it made their average output go down in quality significantly. So a lot of it is you have to kind of train people and know what the limits are. But some of the questions is if you're working with AI, you have to consider how important it is to customize the output. So a lot of almost all the examples I used for you guys were things that were largely generic content. But if you want something that's highly customized, like say you want to write a customized response to someone who just gave you $100,000, you shouldn't be using AI for that. It's going to sound generic, right? So you don't want to be using AI for that. But most often, I'm just using AI as a source for research. So for example, whenever I'm writing a course, I look online for all the syllabi that are publicly available of a similar course, and I just learn looking over their syllabi. Well, I'll do the same thing with AI. I'll say, design a syllabi on this topic, and I'll compare it. And surprisingly, the AI-generated syllabi usually is better than 90% of the ones that are actually real courses at other universities. The other big thing to avoid problems with AI is to train staff. The biggest kind of lesson is that you treat it like you would doing Google searches, but with more skepticism. So Google searches, if someone says, why is that true? And they say, well, I saw it on the internet or I saw it on YouTube. We've all learned to laugh at that, right? Because, there's so much that's just made up. But it's even more made up a lot of times with AI, because like I use the example of, the student who use the AI to generate a prompt, like it will really make stuff up, like invent new books of the Bible, invent new, verses in the Bible. So you have to read what it provides very carefully. There's ways on these things that you can check the sources. So in the examples that I was showing you, and it's the same type of thing, usually with Google, it has the source. So a lot of times there's quite very tight linkage to that source, and it will link you directly to the chapter of this book that actually had a chapter on City Union Mission in Kansas City. But other times it'll link you to a source, and you can tell it just made it up. So you have to actually look at that. Organizationally, you probably need to have some guidelines on key areas. Like if you're going to use this for fundraising, you need to have guidelines so people aren't writing generic responses to your major donors, as an example, right? So the common problems I mentioned, hallucinations. So AIs all work by, it's essentially statistics. So it's basically guessing what the next word should be. So sometimes whenever it's guessing, it makes up things. It's like, well, this sounds like a book of the Bible, and this sounds like it might be a verse in that book of the Bible, so it creates that. The other problem is generic responses. If you want something that's somewhat generic, then that's great. But if you want something customized, then it's more difficult. Recognize the e-bike problem with learning. If people are using AI and you ask them to do something, then they're just going to have the e-bike go up the hill. And the whole point of learning is that you're pedaling to go up the hill, and potentially using AI to cheat, for various things. So why don't I pause there and just ask for folks who've used AI, and based on what I've shared so far, what are your concerns? What are your questions? And even if you haven't used AI, what are your concerns? What are your questions? Does this intrigue you? Make you think, okay, maybe I'll use this, or does it just make you think that Andrew's a nerd and I'm not going to be as nerdy as Andrew? So
I
jump
wonder
in
if
with
one
questions.
figure out the answer to your question there is to listen to the rest of that podcast. Is that something that you could share with us? If it takes 3 minutes to do that, and we can learn to do that with our own missions, or even in just the generic history of rescue mission work around the country, that could be useful for onboarding new staff.
Yeah. So you mentioned that generic version of the podcast, and I'm going to give some links at the end. But I took those and I converted what was just audio into a YouTube video. So I'll send this, and you can access it there. It's also the audio is actually in this toolkit, and I'm going to have a screenshot where you can get to this toolkit. It's this rescue mission history for new staff. But I also have a YouTube link there that I'll be able to send you. I think this one is actually on our website now. I mean, on our YouTube page. This one, I created one for Bay Area Rescue Mission to customize it, and I didn't link that because I haven't talked with Bram. I'm sure he's probably fine with it, but I didn't want to put it on our publicly available for that. So, one other example, and I showed you these examples that are just audio only. One of our partners used a tool that does the same thing, but the whole, and I'll show you this real quick also. The whole person is simulated through AI. So he took one of my talks that was recorded and then converted it to having someone else present. So this woman is not a real woman, and she's providing an AI overview of an hour-long lecture that I did.
And I'm the teaching assistant for Dr. Andrew. Hello everyone, my name is Madeline and I'm the teaching assistant for Dr. Andrew Sears. Today, I'm excited to share his vision on why Christian higher education must be reinvented, especially for those serving the poor and those struggling with addiction. In this presentation, we'll explore our core values centered around Jesus and how a renewed theological vision can reshape our educational institutions to meet today's challenges.
All right. So for this ministry, I mean, on one level, you're kind of like, gee whiz, that's interesting. For this ministry that I was working with, they're in 100 countries and like over 100 languages, and they need to be able to present material. What this is doing is this is allowing them to present material with people that look like the audience that they're serving, that automatically translate into the audience that they're serving, so that they could have videos for, they're serving millions of people in these countries. So that's another example of things that you could do. But you could imagine using this with clients. Most missions, they might cover 2 or 3 languages with their staff, but what do you do if you get someone who's they speak Hmong and that's their only language? Well, that's difficult, but you could probably create an orientation video in Hmong for them, using this tool. So, yeah. Other questions?
Podcast links, I'd be happy to share them with the larger group if it's available. Whatever.
Yeah, definitely.
Could we see the cross? You were going to show us the cross that AI generated at the end of your podcast.
The cross?
Did you mention you generated a cross, an icon?
No, it was the NASCAR. It was the NASCAR video that I used. But you can do it, with a cross, and I can show you. I mean, let me just show you an example of how you would do that. Is I'll just do create an image of a cross with the words just all right, I'm on a different one. I think I have to switch to this. So let me copy this prompt. There's different versions of Gemini, and for whatever reason, I don't think that one can be done there. So, all right. Yeah, other questions that people had?
So is that based on the collection of data of those hundreds of missions that you have to generate that cross?
No. So it will generate it based on its own kind of AI algorithms for things along those lines. So, what are other people's thoughts? I want to engage with you guys. So, come on. What are you thinking related to AI on this?
Any advice on using AI as far as our risk commission and social media? I've created images for another agency and they look super real. Is there pros and cons? There's a social media session next door that was pretty popular. I don't think they talked about AI, but that's something our missions do. AI and social media, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, creating images for social media could be, really helpful. If I were doing that, it's going to be kind of tricky trying to figure out. You don't want some sort of negative PR from something like that. So trying to make sure how you present that, that you're, not getting a negative, PR, however you're presenting that. But I think that that's a great way to do that. So other examples or who else has used, I mean, just raise your hand if you use AI at all. Okay, so what are some examples where you've used it, where you've tried to, apply? I mean, my wife uses it all the time to do vacation planning. This vacation that I just mentioned where we're in San Francisco, like she found a good place for us to go out to eat, and I was like, wow, that was impressive, and like it had a plan for the whole day. So what are some examples of what you all have how you guys have used it, especially if it relates to your organization?
I was able to use it. I was able to use it to design a new logo for the mission. It was founded in 2001, so it's extremely old and outdated. The people working at the mission with me were still kind of in that era. So for them, AI was something that was foreign to them or scary or whatever. But now recently, AI has advanced to the point where you can create logos and they actually get the lettering right. For the longest time, they couldn't even spell simple things like Columbus. Just spell you right. And so I was able to create a new logo, sharp, crisp, for example, or I run the men's discipleship program. So a lot of times if guys are giving me handwritten materials or anything like that, I take a picture, send to AI, transcribes it to a Word document, done, easy. Things like that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, the image generation is really impressive. And a lot of times you got to be very specific and it was weird how a year ago it couldn't handle text. It could do all this complicated stuff, but it couldn't handle text. Now most of them are getting to where they can put text. It would create like imaginary letters. Essentially, is what it did. But now it's able to do that. So other uses?
It's not related to the mission, but I had AI write a book for me. And then I have it on Amazon for sale.
Have you made any money?
I did a great introduction. I did the cover art. Someday I might read it. It's clearly written by AI in the description, so no one's surprised.
Yeah.
But it's incredible.
What's the name of it? 10 most humble people I met.
That was about defending against AI from an insider's perspective. From AI.
Yeah. Well, my son, in one of his classes, he attends a Christian school. In one of the classes, they assigned a book that was AI generated. And his favorite thing about the book was that it had all these illustrations, but all the illustrations, because they're generated by early AI, they had like comical problems. Like one guy had 7 fingers on both hands, and like AI doesn't know that people have 5 fingers. So, so he didn't pay attention to the book, but he loved the fact, that on each picture it was kind of like, can you find the AI errors, right? So
when you're using it for like publication or research for like a specific thing, do you have to acknowledge that you got your research materials from AI?
Yeah, so usually how I do that, and there's like APA standards, and I'm not as like nerdy about them because they try to do things like say you have to enter the exact prompt and on what date and things like that. But how I usually do it is, for those example documents, let me just show you kind of at the bottom of the document how I usually reference it. And this is a cross that it created. But so on this at the bottom, this summary was generated with assistance by Notebook LM using the materials in this course. It was reviewed for accuracy and edited by City Vision faculty. So I don't want to be misrepresenting, but I also don't want to get into like, honestly, this was like 7 or 8 different iterations, and I edited like probably 30% of it. And I combined basically like the response of 5 different prompts and then put it into that. So I don't want to go into all the details. So I think it is important you don't, misrepresent if you're publishing things. And part of it is you just have to think through like what does it look like. But I mean, just as an example, City Union Mission could publish a new history. Like it'd be fairly easy for someone to just dump all the newsletter archives into this Notebook LM and then combine, I know that there is a chapter in a book and then you have some stuff on your web page. You could probably, put your YouTube videos in there, and then you could ask it to write a book on an updated history of City Union Mission. It could probably come up with, my guess is an 80-page history that's better than anything you guys currently have as an example. But that's only if someone wants to do it. But honestly, you could probably do that in a couple hours, would be my guess. And then the real work would be editing that. So yeah.
So your Notebook LM is kind of your sandbox, if you will, where that's your worldview. You want to generate AI from this sandbox, not from the entire world, just this area to generate information. Is that semi-accurate?
Yeah, that's the way to think about it, because it's going to focus the topics around that. And it often refers to the sources, right? So if you're wanting to get an updated history, it's pretty easy to just take PDFs of, past 20 years of stuff, and it's going to ingest all that. Now, it comes up with some weird things like I asked it to generate a timeline of missions, and it came up with, like the first couple pages was fine, but then it came up with it just picked on one mission and then said, in this one mission, they hired this staff on this day, and this staff on this day, and this staff on this day. And I'm like, that does not belong in a comprehensive history of the rescue mission movement. You know what I'm saying? So that's part of why you got to, like, it doesn't, I mean, it's fairly good at understanding what's important, but sometimes it's not. So
what does LM stand for? Book LM, you
said. What does LM stand for? It's language model. So this whole space is based on large language models. So essentially where AI came from was once you get a critical mass of internet content, and Google came up with a new algorithm called a transformer that basically changed the whole world. And there's this debate, and I'm not going to go into the debate, like, could machines become sentient or not? Theologians like to say no, just because we're privileged. As a computer scientist, it's really a scientific question. Like, I would have thought what we're doing with AI right now wasn't possible, but someone discovered an algorithm that made it possible. So are there other algorithms? I don't know. Like, I mean, we don't need to go into all that, but I think we have to be humble enough, intellectually humble enough. Now, I don't think they will ever be human. I don't think that they're going to have souls. I don't think we're going to be going in heaven and all of a sudden there's going to be a bunch of AIs, right? I think the Bible gives us those answers, but like, how smart can these things get? If we want to just say, well, the Bible tells me they're never going to get that smart. Well, I don't know. I mean, that's really, I just sat in a self-driving car, and people, the top experts in AI 10 years ago said it's going to be, probably 50 years before we have self-driving cars. But someone discovered a new algorithm, and then that changed the game, so that's why, computer science, there are parts of it that really are a science. Like, no one knew that algorithm existed, and then they found it. other uses or other questions, things you worry about with this? All right, I'm going to go ahead and go into some other slides. So here's some organizational strategies that I would recommend. So compile key documents by department. So AI works better in what you're getting at before with Google Notebook LM is data silos focused in a particular domain. So like programs, policies and procedures. Man, speeding up developing policies and procedures could be helpful. I hate writing procedures, but we got hundreds and hundreds of pages of procedures. Development, grants, mission history. I use history as an example because honestly, I think this is the low-hanging fruit. And focus on mainstream adoption, not the bleeding edge. That's a kind of a tech term of, if you're trying to do the cutting edge stuff. These companies, Google and Microsoft, is where it's going to come from. Focus on them. A lot of the other companies in maybe OpenAI, but honestly, I'm really focusing on Google and Microsoft because they have to focus on the average person. There will be some specialist companies that will emerge for specialist functions. So like my wife, she does a lot of training in her context. So part of what she does is she can rewrite, like that video that I was showing you, where you have a, person who's presenting material. My wife uses a tool where if you want to change what this person's saying, you can just edit the text and it will re-record the video. I have videos all the time that I'm like, all I need to change is 2 seconds because I said the wrong thing or that is now out of date. That's not true anymore. And I wish I could just edit it without re-recording. So there's like tools like that that are, as an example of a specialist tool. And, recognize the hype that everyone's saying they're incorporating AI, but generally only if they're not a tech company and they're doing AI, they're basically, it's just a marketing term. Because only uber techies are going to be able to do this well. This is difficult. It's going to be hard for any organization with less than $1 billion to do this well, unless they're using tools that a billion-dollar organization does this well. Now, I want to leave with a little bit of geek humor. Sometimes in my philosophical days, I wonder, is God just up there writing code, right? Which I don't think is the case, but I like this little line where I don't know if that's Peter helping God there, say you can't just punch in, let there be light, without writing the code underlying the user interface functions. I don't think that that's how God's doing things, but sometimes it's interesting to think about things like that. So any other questions or comments that you guys have on this?
Prove that AI isn't actually leading our discussion right now.
Yeah. Is it, leading, yeah, am I an AI? I mean, there's going to be some interesting spaces that I think are going to emerge that are going to be pretty controversial. So like you look at the cost of counseling right now to the average client that you guys are serving, they can get good counseling while they're with you. I think that in 10 years, most people will get their counseling through AI bots. It won't be as good as a real person, but it'll be good enough for a lot of people. Now, that's worrying. And part of it is, can you frame the AI so it matches your worldview? So even like, how do Christians engage with something like that? Just like I shape these prompts, you could probably shape a counselor saying, I want a counselor who has a Christian worldview, who has values like this, this, and this, that's going to help me work through these issues. And then you would probably get an AI counselor that has that, right? Now, that's not going to be as good as the real thing. And, the one thing that there's things that AI is not going to probably ever be good at. And one of the things I think is motivation. So if you have an AI counselor, you're going to lie to your counselor and not even blink. But if it's a real person, you think about that and you have that depth of relationship, right? But part of it is, okay, well, is an AI counselor better than what they're doing right now? Is they're trying to counsel themselves based on whatever random Google search they did? Probably. So, there's going to be some things along those lines that emerge that will be controversial in this space. I'm not recommending that, rescue missions install AI counselors and fire all the counseling staff, but I'm just kind of explaining that. So, any other thoughts or questions?
Can you show us your hands?
Yeah, I'm real. But you know what, man, AI could actually do that. So, but I don't know that an AI would remember that I spent my summer in 1992 with you and at your mission. Yeah, so.
So realistic.
So I wonder if some folks will actually use the AI counselors instead, because they'll feel like they can be open and honest, where they may feel ashamed talking to another real human being.
Yeah, I mean, it might that might be a starting point, and it's kind of like the same thing, like whenever people have something that they really feel ashamed about, they'll ask Google, but they won't ask their pastor, they won't ask a real counselor, but they'll ask Google. So maybe it'll be a little bit better, than that. So, and part of what's happening right now is at a lot of warehouses, there are robots that are shadowing people. And essentially, the people working at these warehouses are basically the robots are watching the people so that they can replace them. There's a lot of these online counseling companies. The real money is not in doing online counseling. The real money is in doing online counseling and telling the clients you'll only charge them half of what you normally would, because an AI is going to be monitoring that counseling to figure out how to be a better counselor than the person that they're monitoring. So that's where the real money is going to be. And over time, part of the reason why I'm motivated the way I am is a lot of jobs for the poor are getting automated away, and that's putting more pressure on the poor, and that's increasing the challenge for you guys. So ultimately what we have to do, and part of what my doctoral work was, you can either race against the machine and just say that, we should be like Luddites and we should destroy all the AIs, or you can race with the machine. And the reason why our central focus is using technology to enable education is because, rescue missions in the long run, ultimately what we have to do is we have to re-educate people for the new jobs that are out there. And the more effective you are at using AI for that, then the more that's going to be a key competency of rescue missions in the future. So anyway, hopefully all this is helpful. Hopefully I didn't nerd you out too much, but if you have questions or you want to get access to this notebook LM on the history, send me an email. So my email is andrew@cityvision.edu, and I'd love to hear from you. So.
Thank you.